Do you think your time at Iowa State as a math and statistics major, do you think that prepared you well for those types of roles?
I think so, because what I learned pretty quickly that math background and that analytical background that you get can aid you in almost any business endeavor. And almost everything in business is numbers. A lot of folks who don't have that background are flying a little bit more seat of the pants and not thinking in terms of math in the same way.
Greetings. Welcome to Eric's Angle, the podcast for Iowa State mathematics students. I am your host, Eric Weber, chair of the mathematics department at Iowa State University. Today's guest is a 1989 graduate of our program, earning degrees in mathematics and statistics. His name is Scott Kongable, and he is the retired president of the Crystal Group, a company that is located in Hiawatha, Iowa. Currently, Scott engages in technology consulting and in his spare time enjoys working the family farm in southeast Iowa. Please welcome Scott Kongable.
Hi, Scott. Welcome to Eric's Angle. Thanks for being here.
I'm excited to be here.
So, why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, I'm a native Iowan. I grew up on a farm in southeast Iowa. I attended Iowa State, majored in mathematics and statistics. And when I graduated, I went to work for Rockwell Collins in Cedar Rapids as a test engineer, so responsible for factory test of new products. From there, I transitioned into a reliability engineering position with Rockwell and ended up my time at Rockwell as a project engineer in the military GPS business area. I then accepted a position with Crystal Group in Hiawatha, and Crystal is a rugged computer manufacturer, as their director of engineering. And then in 2003, became their president and was president for about 20 years and then retired about a year ago.
So, you mentioned a couple of positions at Rockwell that have the word engineer in the title. So, was there a mismatch between being a math major versus an engineer of some sort and getting a position like that?
Well, it seems to be a little bit of a mismatch, but there are a lot of engineering duties that aren't necessarily detailed design. This was for as a test engineer, it was capturing factory test data, analyzing that data, some of the more mundane tasks like updating test documentation. And then in reliability engineering, there's a lot of math involved with that as you try to figure out the mean time between failures, mean time to repair, and those sort of tasks. And then by the time I moved into project engineering, it was really project management and account management and things like that. And then when I moved to the director of engineering position, it was still not necessarily needing that detailed design information, but project management and general management of people. So, yes, there are a lot of engineering tasks where mathematicians and statisticians can thrive without necessarily knowing detailed circuit design or mechanical design, things like that.
So, from what you just said, a piece of advice for our students might be don't be afraid to apply for a job that has engineer in the title, even if you think you might not be suitable for it, because who knows, right? Who knows what exactly the job might entail?
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, if it's a true design engineering task where you've got to go down and do schematics or mechanical design, probably not a great fit. But I was blessed to be, growing up on a farm, you involve yourself in a lot of mechanical things. You learn carpentry and you do a little bit of electrical work, plumbing, things like that. So you do have that hands-on experience from there. And then combined with I had just an overall interest in science and engineering, reading about that as much as I could. So I had a smattering of the knowledge when I was working with the engineers, but I really had to sit down and analyze a circuit or design a product or stress analysis, things like that.
Hmm. So, how did you actually end up as a math and statistics major then when you came to Iowa State?
So that was a kind of a convoluted path. So I was accepted to Iowa State as an aerospace engineering major. I was going to be an Air Force ROTC. I intended to have a career in the Air Force. And actually, about 3 weeks before classes started, I got a letter from the Air Force. I had applied for a scholarship, and they said there were no scholarships available for aerospace engineers, but if I wanted to major in math, biology, or meteorology, they'd pay for my school. And my real intent was I wanted to be a fighter pilot and eventually an astronaut. So my viewpoint was it didn't really matter what I majored in that regard. And as much as I liked weather, I really didn't want to be a meteorologist. And of all the sciences, biology was probably my least favorite of those. And I said, well, I always really liked math. I'll just be a math major. So it was really the Air Force pushed me that direction by saying they'd pay for my school if I did that.
That's fascinating. I wonder if they happen to have said why they would be interested in you studying math.
I
Did you ever
never
get any sense of that?
I never really could get an answer for that, although I do know that, in the various tiers, math was in the top tier with aerospace engineers, electrical engineers, and meteorologists and biologists. So, maybe it was where they had a shortage of folks at that time, or there were things that they wanted to do with those careers. Now, I do think that's probably a good indication. There's probably quite a few career fields in the military for math majors if they prioritize them like that.
Yes, indeed. I think that's true. So, so you were thinking about actually going into the Air Force and becoming a pilot. I actually wanted to become a pilot as well when I was in high school, but that was not something I actually pursued. Um, so then you ended up not, were you in the Air Force at all?
I
When
was
you
in the
were at
reserves.
ROTC?
I was in the reserves for a while, and at the time when you graduated, you had about 6 months till you reported to pilot training. And so I said, well, I need to do something. So I applied for an internship at Rockwell Collins. So my first job was as a college graduate, but as an intern at Collins. And then, unfortunately, a long story, ended up with a medical discharge, and I didn't actually go to flight school. And the Air Force told me that I'm a civilian, and I happened to be at Collins at the time, and that's when I worked with the reliability engineers as a test engineer. And I said, hey, I'm looking for a job. And they're like, hey, we'd love to have mathematician, statistician in reliability engineering. And so they offered me a job there, and that's where I started my official career.
And so, okay, so in college, you were anticipating being in the Air Force, so you didn't probably think about a civilian career trajectory. But then as you entered a civilian workforce, did you ever anticipate the direction your career would take at that time?
I would say not at all. What I felt was that the math degree combined with a stat degree, as well as all the other classes at Iowa State, had prepared me to really be able to, in essence, react to whatever life was offering me. And I looked for ways where I could take what I had learned and what I knew to be of value to Rockwell. And that was really the secret of it. Is I spent all my time trying to figure out where can this particular skill set I have be of great value to my employer. And I think I succeeded pretty well at that because I had a fairly successful career there.
And then you mentioned as you were at Rockwell, as you continued at Rockwell, you ended up in a position that was more of a managerial role, like managing people.
I did not have direct reports in my time at Collins. As a project engineer, you're responsible for the schedule and the budget performance of your project and coordinating the activities of the engineers, but it was really a matrix organization in that regard. And they all reported to their department heads, but they were assigned to your program. So the real trick there is to get people who don't work directly for you to do what you're asking them to do.
I understand. But then you ended up eventually in leadership roles, I guess, at Crystal Group.
Yeah, so at Crystal, I was actually I never really checked the classifieds. And one day I was just looking through the classifieds, and there was a position as the director of engineering at a company called Crystal. And at the time, I didn't feel that my career was going to go the way I wanted to in the GPS business area at Collins. So I applied, and they essentially said, "Do you know anything about project management?" I said, "Yeah, that's what I've been doing." And surprisingly enough, they hired me as the director of engineering with a math and stat degree, and did that for a little bit under 5 years. And then at that time, the CEO of the company came to me and said, "Looking at making a change in leadership. Are you interested in being the president? We think you've done a pretty good job as a manager." And I took the president position.
Do you think your time at Iowa State as a math and statistics major, do you think that prepared you well for those types of roles?
I think so, because what I learned pretty quickly, and as we said earlier, I wasn't really that interested in what I would call doing math for math's sake, because I wasn't intending to be a math major as much, but I was quite interested in how math and statistics allowed me to understand the rest of the world and gain wisdom about what was going on. And I think that math background and that analytical background that you get can aid you in almost any business endeavor, whether it's learning about engineering design, whether you're reading the financials of a company, whether you're doing project management. Anytime you can do that analysis that says these things are related, or I understand how things are changing, and almost everything in business is numbers. So anytime you can understand how that's changing, then the math background, I think, gives you insight into things that a lot of folks who don't have that background are flying a little bit more seat of the pants and not thinking in terms of math in the same way.
Hmm. So when you talk about things changing, it makes me think of calculus, right? Derivatives.
It's amazing how many times I did bring that up. I mean, pretty much after I'd been out in the workforce for over 6 years, I never really sat down and did detailed calculus anymore. I wasn't given a particular equation and said, find the derivative. But I think the understanding of differential and integral calculus and the insight that it can give you into the world gives you an understanding that many people who don't think that way never can reach. Now, I have done a lot of algebra. I do think that algebra is this key underpinning of all the analysis I've done. But really, it's understanding how things are changing in a business. And there's the derivative is really that. How are things changing in the business? Is it becoming more favorable, less favorable? Is it staying the same? And I think combined with the statistics and operating in terms of uncertainty and variability, those two are very powerful in understanding what's going on in a business.
So do you have if you were going to talk to yourself back when you were a college student at Iowa State and give yourself some advice, would you have anything that comes to your mind in that regard?
Well, from a pure math perspective, I really wish I'd paid more attention to series. I think they're a lot more powerful than I understood at the time. But really, I think what I didn't understand when I first graduated from Iowa State that I learned later that I wish I had understood in some of my other classes is, instead of just sitting down and doing the exercise that's in front of you, regardless of what class it's in, is figuring out what it means to somebody who's not a mathematician. So it took me, I would say, a couple years at Rockwell Collins to understand that whatever analysis I did, I had to be able to really talk about the results in prose. in a way that somebody who, as soon as you start saying derivative or integral or anything like that, they start to check out. And so what I learned was you had to be able to take the mathematical terminology and, in essence, convert that to words that non-math people understand. And in order to do that, I realized that I needed to have a much deeper understanding of what that particular analysis was trying to get to. And I don't know how I would have done better at that at Iowa State, because I wasn't thinking in those terms. But if you can really get to where is this important to somebody who's not a mathematician, I think that helps you a lot.
Hmm.
And not just get fixated on solving the problem, but understanding the type of problem and what you can learn from it.
So it sounds like you're describing maybe two somewhat distinct phenomena. One is understanding the context of the problem that you might be working on, or maybe the motivation, perhaps. And the other one is effective communication, effectively communicating what you did in your analysis, what you did to derive your solution, if it's something that is solution oriented, say. Sounds like those are two really important things to have in mind when approaching projects of some variety in any of these types of situations. And go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, because again, since I wasn't what I would consider your typical math major who is thinking more about, finishing math, getting a bachelor's and getting a master's, and maybe even going to the doctorate level. And I don't mean to be a negative, but the doing math for math's sake. And I was always more of the, what can math help me understand about the physical world or the real world. I'd agree with that, is understanding why what you're doing is going to be important to somebody, and how you can help that somebody, whoever it is, make better decisions. And so that's the first part, and I agree with you. And then I think the second part is exactly what you said, is you've got to take what you've learned and the insight you've gained and phrase it in a way that helps them make the best decision possible. When you do analysis, right, is you're trying to come up with, how do I make a decision about something? I don't, whether it's business, a design, a test, marketing plan, whatever it is, it's all going to be measured with numbers. But the people who have to make decisions about it may not be that number oriented.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things I've been telling people recently, there's this proverb, if you will, or conundrum about, if a tree falls in the woods and nobody's there, does it make a sound? And I've turned that phrase to say, if you've solved a math problem, but you haven't communicated your solution to anybody, have you really solved it?
Yeah, I think that's is very apt in this regard, in this discussion, because when I started out as a test engineer, I had so many amazing charts and graphs and everything, and I'm like, look at all this data and all this information, and I had an engineer say, well, what do we do differently with it? And my answer was, well, I don't know. And that was kind of the moment. I was probably about 3 or 4 months into that, when I realized that I had done a whole lot of work, and the work was really only interesting to me because I was the only one who knew what I had done, and that, in essence, Collins had paid me quite a bit of money to not help their business run any better. And it was almost an epiphany as how do you fit into and how you provide value to a company.
Well, Scott, I really appreciate your time and your insight, especially with your own career, starting as a math major at Iowa State and then moving up to leadership roles at the Crystal Group. So do you have any last thoughts for our students?
I do. I think the basis for a lot of my success was I was an avid reader early in my career. I subscribed to magazines like Scientific American, Discover, Popular Mechanics. And as I read through all of those, I really tried to understand how my education and experience could help me understand that more. So many times I'd be faced with a problem that was somewhat analogous to, something I had read about. I'm like, oh, this is just like this. And I think it gave me a step up. And I tell people, one of the things to do is to work on your abstract reasoning capabilities, because that way you don't have to relearn everything every time you reach a new situation. You've got some sort of structure to figure out what has happened that's similar. And I think if you do that, then you can apply that skill and experience much more effectively and help whoever the stakeholders are in your decisions and your analysis do a better job, and you provide a lot more value that way.
Scott, thanks again.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.